Hi guys! In today's video I'm going to show you how to paint the sun in space. I started with a little bit of cadmium yellow, and the space beneath the sun I used ultramarine blue and magenta. When you mix them together they create a really lovely shade of purple. I started to create some kind of a texture on the surface of the sun. For this first layer I used just pure vermilion red. It's a really warm toned red color. Then I started to mix it with a little bit of a cadmium red deep and some cadmium yellow. You can see here that I started to create some darker red parts and some with lighter red. For this part, I basically wasn't following any kind of a plan. I kind of took just my cues from the painting and let it build up quite organically. Once I had the base layer down, I started to create some shadows and darker parts on the surface. I didn't use any black paint for this part, I just used burnt umber. I think it goes really well with the other colors. Burnt umber actually has some red tone in it. I used a very small flat brush to create some darker spots on the surface. If you look at the pictures of the sun, you can actually see that it's not all just orange and yellow. It does have those tiny little darker spots. While the paint was drying on the sun, I went back to the space and added some more magenta and ultramarine blue. As I went closer to the surface of the sun, I added some Naples Yellow to the magenta. It makes it a little bit more brighter and lighter. And then it was time to work on the surface of the sun again. This time I went in with a little mixture of cadmium yellow and Naples Yellow. And I started to study the painting and kinda look it from distance and see where I would like to place my highlights. I often like to mix some Naples Yellow to my cadmium yellow because cadmium yellow in itself is very transparent paint, and if you try to paint it over a red color, it doesn't really show. So you just need to add a little bit of Naples Yellow and it looks so much better. After I had my highlights in place, I started to create even more shadows and lights to the surface. I wanted it to look as if the light was almost exploding out of those darker parts. I also sprinkled in some Naples Yellow, cadmium red and burnt umber, just to make the surface look a bit more interesting and more lifelike. I think this has to be one of the messiest parts of my painting process when I'm sprinkling the paints. I like to use my fingers for it. I know that you can actually just tap two brushes together and create the same effect. But I don't know, I just like to get my fingers in paint, I guess. After I had cleaned my fingers and sprinkled the paint, I went in over again with Naples Yellow and Cadmium Yellow, but this time I used a really small brush. I wanted to create very crisp lines where the light was breaking through from the darker parts. When you are doing very detailed work like this one right here, I think it's so important that you take a little breaks and step on the other side of the room and look at the canvas. That way you can see how the painting will look as a whole. If you just spend all your time painting very close to the canvas, the end result may not be the same when you are looking the painting at a distance. And finally, I painted some rays of sunlight exploding to the space beyond. I used again the same mixture of Naples Yellow and Cadmium Yellow. But for this part, I had to do multiple layers for the yellow to really pop up. I just let each layer dry up somewhat, and then I just went over it again and again. And I always added a little bit more cadmium yellow as opposed to my Naples Yellow. And because this is a space painting, I just had to add some stars to the space above. At this point, the painting starts to look quite finished in my eyes, and I actually just went in with a little smallest brush I could find and just added some final details. Again, I had to stand down from the canvas and look it at a distance. That way, at least for me, I can see it so much easier where I need some details or something needs to be fixed. And finally, here you can see the finished painting. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you did, please leave me a like and subscribe for more.